Let's talk about Yummy. This deck is this deck is funny because it's just a bunch of little silly guys, and it has a pretty interesting gimmick. In order to understand Yummy, we should start with explaining the summoning condition for the synchros, because it is a synchro focused deck. The 3 archetypes in the set are all focused on different summoning mechanics. K9 is focused on exceeds, Yummy on synchros, and Dragontail on fusions. So with Yummy, they have a special rate when it comes to the synchro summoning as well, because all of the Yummy synchros are level 2 synchros, and they say for this card synchro summon, you can treat a Link 1 monster you control as a level 1 tuner. So as a result of this, the Yummy deck actually does not have any tuners. They do not play tuners. They have a Link 1 that is basically their tuner, but it also means you can use other Link 1s as level 1 tuners, like something like Kagari when you have Sky Striker Hornet drones, a Link Spider after you get Nibiru. All of those can be used as tuners in the Yummy deck. That out of the way, let's talk about the starters first for Yummy. And it's interesting because technically all 3 of the Yummy main deck monsters are pretty much the same. They do very similar things. They all have the same phrase, which is if you control a Link 1 monster or a level 2 synchro monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. This, most importantly, does not start a chain, so it does not play into K9 Izuna. The entire Yummy combo can be played without activating any effects in hand or graveyard, so Yummy is one of the better decks into K9 Izuna. I think that is worth mentioning. They basically work like sprite monsters in this sense, right? Like they can all summon each other from the hand, which already leads us to one of the main weaknesses of the Yummy deck, unfortunately. If the first summon is dealt with, if you like remove the first body off of the field, they have a tough time extending further because they require a board presence to special summon themselves. But we'll talk more about that later. Cookie Yummy says, if this card is normal or special summoned, you can target a face-up monster your opponent controls, it loses 1000 attack. Or if this card was special summoned by the effect of a synchro monster, you can destroy that monster instead. You can only use each effect of Cookie Yummy once per turn. Now this shows another aspect of all of the Yummy monsters. They all have an effect on summon, and that effect changes when they are summoned by the effect of a synchro monster, which is a very important gimmick of the Yummy deck, because all of the synchro monsters for the Yummies have an effect to basically tag out. They all have an effect to return back to the extra to summon 2 Yummies from the graveyard, which is one of the main ways how you can interrupt your opponent on the opponent's turn, is by basically turning your synchros back into the main deck monsters, and then you get the pop effect on Cookie Yummy, for example. So Cookie Yummy on summon, target a monster, loses 1000, or pop it when you summon it with a synchro monster effect. Lollipop is if this card is normal or special, you can target a card in your opponent's graveyard, shuffle it into the deck, or if this card was special by the effect of a synchro monster, you can banish it instead. So this is a good effect even if it's normal summoned or special summoned. The Lollipop gives you graveyard interaction, and the Cupsy, if this card is normal or special summoned, you can add a Yummy card from your deck to your hand, or if this card was special by the effect of a synchro, you can draw a card instead. So on your first turn, technically, this is your best starter because it gets you a card on normal summon, which is really good. The other 2, technically, when you're going first, they don't do anything on summon, right? Because there's nothing for them to do yet. Still, Cookie and Lollipop are still good starters for the deck, because the thing that matters the most about this deck is that you can go into your Link 1. Cupsy is a good card, the best starter, because it searches on summon, and on the opponent's turn, if you don't need to add any more Yummy cards from deck to hand because you already have everything you need in rotation, you can just try to draw a hand trap with it or follow up, which is good. But your goal ultimately with all 3 of these main deck monsters is you want to turn them into your Link 1 and then eventually into a Synchro 2. Yummy Snatchy is the Link 1. It needs any level 4 or lower light beast monster. If this card is special summoned, you can place a Yummy field spell from your deck, from your hand or deck face up onto your field. Also, you cannot Link summon Link 3 or higher Link monsters for the rest of this turn. You can only use this effect of Snatchy once per turn, once per chain during the main phase or your opponent's battle phase. Quick effect, you can pay 100 life points immediately after this effect resolves. Synchro summon using monsters you control as material, including a Yummy monster. So basically, this is how you will get to the Yummy field spell. We'll look at that next, but the Yummy field spell is basically how you will get into a second body to make your first synchro summon. And basically, you have the ability to synchro summon on your opponent's turn over and over and over again, because like I said earlier, all the different synchro monsters have an effect to return themselves to the extra deck to bring out 2 Yummies from the graveyard. So what you're gonna do is you bring back the Snatchy and the one of the main deck monsters, you get the bonus effect of the main deck monster, and then you can use the Snatchy to synchro summon again on the opponent's turn. They have 2 field spells in Justice Hunters that people are going to play. The one that's the most important one, I believe, is Minion, which is the one you grab off of Snatchy most of the time. Yummy monsters you control gain 500 attack for each light beast on the field, so they can actually get quite big. You can only use each of the following effects once per turn. If you control a Link 1 monster, you can target a level 1 Yummy in your grave, special summon it. This is how, once you have normal summoned any of the Yummies, you turn it into the Link 1. The Link 1 gets you the field spell, and the field spell gets you a second body onto the field. That way, you can get into your first Synchro 2, and you can get going. That's the basic way to go about it. If this card's in your grave, you can target 2 Yummies in grave or banishment, place this card and them on the bottom of the deck in any order. This is basically how you only play 1 copy of the field spell, but you are able to recycle it basically infinitely alongside some of your main deck and extra deck monsters. So you can recycle basically. But this is an important piece to the puzzle because it gets you a second body onto the field. Then there is Yummy's Mint a Croaky, which is a card that doesn't do a whole lot on your own turn, but this is the one because Yummy Snatchy says if this card is special summoned, this means you can also do it on the opponent's turn when you tag out the synchros into it. So you can replace the minion with the Croaky on the opponent's turn. And it says if you synchro summon a light beast synchro, you can target a card your opponent controls, destroy it. So a basic play pattern would be you have a synchro on the field on your opponent's turn. Your opponent tries to do something. You tag out with the synchro into the Link 1 and a main deck Yummy monster. You get the effect of the main deck Yummy monster, and you get the Link effect to replace your field spell with the Croaky. And then you can quick synchro with the Link monster and then get the pop. If a face-up monster you control leaves the field by an opponent's card effect, you can special summon a Yummy from your deck. If this card's in your grave, target 2 Yummy monsters in your grave or banishment, place them in this card. So because you can keep replacing the field spells, they both have this effect to go back into the deck. Then we have the Synchro monsters, which is obviously the only missing piece to the puzzle. I mean, there's also a quick play spell, but we'll look at that later. And there's a trap, but they don't play it. The Synchro monsters, let's go by order of how important they are. I believe the most important one is Cupsy Yummy Way. You can only use each effect once per turn. If this card is Synchro summoned, you add 2 Yummy monsters from your deck to your hand, and then you discard a card. When your opponent activates a card or effect, quick effect, you can return this card to the extra deck, special summon up to 2 Yummy monsters from your graveyard. So once again, this last effect is very key and is on all of the Yummy Synchro monsters. All of them are able to bounce back to the extra deck to summon 2 Yummies from the graveyard in response to an opponent's card. This is very important because this is all happening in response to the opponent doing something, like SP Little Knight to banish, basically. So one way how people have been trying to deal with Yummy boards is by just special summoning big monsters that don't start a chain, like Pankratops or whatever, and then you can just attack over this stuff without them being able to tag out, basically. But Yummy does have some counterplay to this. But this is the one you want to go in first because it searches you 2 Yummy cards from deck to hand and then discard a card. So you start with one of the Yummies, you go into the Link 1, you go into the field spell, you revive your Yummy monster, you make this Synchro 2, and then you can search the other 2 Yummy monsters that you didn't have yet, and then you can just special summon them from your hand because you have this one. Most importantly, this last effect is not only during your opponent's turn, so this makes it really hard for your opponent to, let's say, Imperm or Veiler. Like, these cards are really, really strong into Imperm Veiler because you can just dodge it, basically, right? This is why Veiler and Imperm are not seeing a lot of play, especially against Yummy. They don't do a whole lot. If you have Imperm or Veiler, basically the only thing you can do against Yummy is you can Imperm or Veiler the Link 1 and just hope they don't have an extender. Like, basically hope they just have no other Yummy card in hand, and then you will be fine. But it is not great, right? So this is usually the first synchro you go into because it sets up your Yummy names nicely. You have all the Yummy names in rotation after you resolve Cupsy Yummy Way. Next up, we have Lollipop Yummy Way, which is if this card is synchro summoned, you can special 2 Yummies from your grave but negate their effects. When your opponent activates a card or effect, you can tag out, right? So this is basically once you have all the Yummies in rotation, this one just lets you make more synchros and lets you get more bodies onto the field because it lets you summon 2 Yummies from the grave, which is nice. But plain and simple, this is nice. And then we have Cookie Yummy Way, which is if this card is synchro summoned, you can target up to 2 monsters on the field, change them to face down defense position, and then it also has the tag out effect. This one, obviously, you're not going to use it very often on your first turn, but like you're going to summon it on your opponent's turn to flip their monsters face down. So just from the Yummy cards so far, what we've seen is on the opponent's turn, whenever your opponent does something, you can tag out your synchros into the main deck monsters and the link monster to perform more quick synchros and get some other interruption going. So the interruptions you have are, if you synchro summon, you can pop a card with the field spell. You can pop a monster with Cookie Yummy. You can book 2 monsters with Cookie Yummy Way, banish a card from a graveyard with the Lollipop Yummy, and you can draw a card with Cupsy Yummy, which is already a lot of interaction and a lot of card advantage, and it's just a lot of stuff that this deck can do on the opponent's turn. The only other card that we need to read here is Yummy Surprise, because it's a quick play spell that you can search off of Cupsy Yummy. It says activate one of these effects, but you can only use each effect of Surprise once per turn. Target 2 light beast monsters you control and 2 cards your opponent's controls, returns them to the hand. So basically a double bounce. This, most importantly, this does work if you target your own Yummy cards and then you chain the effect to quick synchro. You know, this is a very easy way to just bounce 2 cards from your opponent, because let's say you have Snatchy and Cupsy on the field. You go Chainlink 1 Surprise, target 2, bounce 2, Chainlink 2 Snatchy to quick synchro. That works. You're not going to lose any cards. You don't have to return your own cards. You can just bounce 2 cards from the opponent with this. Or you can special a Yummy from your hand or grave, but it cannot attack directly this turn. Or you can return a field spell from your face-up field or grave to the hand, then place another field spell from your hand face-up on your field. The most important effect is the bounce 2, right? Most decks play 1 or 2 copies of Yummy Surprise because you will usually be able to search it for free in your first turn combo with Cupsy Yummy. So basically, Yummy works in a way where you try to spam these level 2 synchros, and then on your opponent's turn, you try to tag out into 1 main deck monster and Snatchy, and then you get your effect, and then you synchro summon into another synchro, and then that synchro can tag out, so on and so forth. So it's like, I think it's a fun concept, honestly. It's a really fun concept where you just keep bouncing back and forth on your opponent's turn with the Yummy monsters, and you keep getting your small little bonus effects and so on and so forth. I think it's really cool. It obviously has some very strong synergies with other archetypes or other cards. The most important one is Obedience Schooled, which you can see a lot of people, everyone is going to play this card. The thing is, because Obedience Schooled is technically the best starter in the deck, but it also locks you into beast monsters, people still play this card, but it does make your end board weaker, because one very, very key card in Yummy is Martial Metal Marcher, because I actually haven't mentioned this yet, but the Synchro 2s are tuners. So what you can do, for example, after resolving a Lollipop Yummy Way to special summon 2 Yummies from your grave, you can make a level 3 Synchro into Metal Marcher. That brings back another tuner from your graveyard, and then you can like make 1 or 2 Arclights in this deck relatively easily on your first turn, which is part of most of the 1-card Yummy combos is 1 or 2 Arclights, but you cannot do that if you use Obedience Schooled. If you use Obedience Schooled, you are just doing your Yummy stuff and nothing else. Other stuff that is worth noting is that this deck can play Engage and Hornet Drones to go into a, basically Engage or Hornet Drones is a starter for this deck, because you can go Hornet Drones, summon Kagari, add back Hornet Drones summons a level 1 monster, and then you have a level 1 monster plus Kagari, which, because you can treat the Kagari as a level 1 tuner, you can make your Cupsy Yummy Way to search yourself 2 cards and discard a card. A lot of builds in the OCG are choosing to run some amount of Engage and a Hornet Drones to have just a more consistent deck, right? Like this is also, it plays around the weakness of the deck. Like when you're not able to put a monster onto the field, because this does not need your normal summon, right? You basically have a starter or extender that does not need your normal summon, which is cool. It does conflict with Obedience School though, because Obedience Schooled only works if you have no monsters. So like that's something to keep in mind, that these two, they kind of contradict each other. And because most of the time the only good Sky Striker spell you want to be playing is Hornet Drones, playing 3 Engage is also kind of weird because you never have another target for Engage. So most people only play like 1 or 2 Engages. So it's a very small package. Other things you can do for consistency in this deck is like Piri Rise map and stuff like that. But for the most part, Yummy, as opposed to K9, which is usually like a hybrid engine deck, Yummy is often played as like a pure deck with just like a very small sub engine, like a Sky Striker package. You can also, I've seen people use like Primite packages, because Primite can technically be a starter for Yummy as well, but it comes with some bricks because you need a normal monster for it. So that's that. Yummy is a deck that is often also played with board breakers. A main reason for this, I think, is the fact that the deck can play Impermanence and Dominus Purge and even Songs of the Dominators, because you don't actually use any effects in hand or graveyard in the Yummy engine. None of the Yummies activate in hand to special summon themselves. None of the Yummies have graveyard effects, and that means this deck can be very good against K9 if you just play no hand traps. This list here does have some hand traps. It was just like one of the first attempts that I made at throwing together a list for it for the TCG. But I'm gonna be honest with you, I think a very valid way to play Yummy is just gonna be playing no Charmies or no Ash Blossoms to never play into Izuna. A lot of the format is going to resolve around Izuna, and you might just not play any of these hand traps. Instead, you might want to opt for, like, I could very well see people play 3 Imperm, 3 Purge, 3 Songs of the Dominators, and then just board breakers besides that, which you still have like 9 hand traps, but none of them trigger Izuna because they're all trap cards. Aren't you a bit too weak against Charmies yourself without Ash? The deck is weak into Fuvalos, I think, to a degree. I think you might still be able to make like a somewhat okay half board, but yes, that is a concern. Maybe you just play Ash, even though it conflicts with Purge. We'll see. But the deck has lines. The deck has lines under Charmies. It's not like you auto lose to a single Fuva depending on your hand. So you're always going to see this deck play 3 Snatchies. The Synchros usually are 1 or 2 of, like maximum 2, because you have very easy ways to recycle them with your field spells. And they also recycle themselves by putting themselves into the extra deck. Passing on link 1 and 1 surprise for 1 draw. Yeah, it's really not that bad. I think it's not that bad. I think people are going to try this deck without Ash Blossom, because that's the other thing, right? Ash Blossom is good against Charmies, but in the upcoming format, it's looking like Ash Blossom is it's not a good hand trap. It's actually not a good hand trap. Maybe it's okay against K9 Vanquish Soul if you can hit like a Stake Your Soul and that's their only starter. But even then, you're playing into Izuna like crazy. Ash Blossom is also not great against Yummy, and that's the other thing. Justice Hunters in general, and also Yummy, is going to really shake up the hand trap landscape for the format, because K9 is inherently very strong against hand traps because of Izuna, and Yummy in general, like, is just crazy strong against hand traps. Like, Droll Lockbird does nothing to this deck. This deck searches twice in the full combo, and if you have to skip on one of those searches, it's honestly completely fine. Droll is terrible against this deck. Veiler and Imperm are also terrible against this deck. Ash Blossom is mediocre at best. So I think we are looking at a format where genuinely most hand traps are not going to be incredibly strong, and Draco Tail is the same thing. We're going to talk about Draco Tail later. The most hand traps are not that great against Draco Tail. But yeah, I think Yummy's end board, however, is very interactive and it's powerful. Don't get me wrong, it's going to make a very powerful end board, but I think the way you can win against Yummy is different from the usual. Like, you're not gonna want to hand trap Yummy to death. This deck to me feels like a modern version of Sprite in 2022, where if you remember, it always felt terrible to try and hand trap sprites. You know, that was never something that you would be able to successfully do unless you got very lucky. Like, they normal summon a Nimble Beaver and you have like an Imperm in your hand and you're like, okay, if I Imperm this now, and they have an extender, this Imperm basically does nothing. Or Ryzeal, you know? So I think those kind of hand traps are probably going to fall off with Justice Hunters format, and the same goes for Droll and Lockbird. Of course, decks like Mitsurugi and Ryzeal are still going to be a thing. They don't die immediately because these decks are good, but they don't immediately eliminate like Mitsurugi or Ryzeal or even Malice from the format, because those decks are still strong. Because the most important thing about Yummy is that, like, the end board does have weaknesses. You know, the deck is strong into hand traps, but it does have other weaknesses. For example, their end board is very weak to interruption that does not like start a chain. Like, if you just special people in the OCG against Yummy are playing Pancratops at the moment, because Pancratops just, you summon it does not start a chain, so they cannot tag out their synchros, and you just attack over something. The TCG has Fenrir, which I think Fenrir might be a card that could return in some of these decks as well for the next format. Who knows? It can also, like, Fenrir, I could see people play Fenrir in Vanquish Soul as well, because it can search you a fire monster for your attribute. It's not the worst thing in the world. Kind of bad going second if you've already Xyz summoned with an Izuna or something, but like, Fenrir looks decent. People are just going to be forced to rethink their non-engine choices because of decks like Yummy, which I think is interesting. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. annoying. I think formats where people just auto-include cards like Veiler, Imperm, Ogre, Ash, and so on and so forth in every single deck and play like 15 to 18 or more traditional hand traps tend to be on the more boring side these days, right? And I think it's cool that this format encourages people to think of like different cards again. Like even in the OCG, you see people play less traditional hand traps than before, like in Snake Eyes or Tenpai format. And so I think that part about these new decks is cool. And Yummy plays a huge part in that role because Yummy is like exceptionally strong into these kinds of hand traps. Yummy has some pretty big weaknesses though. Like some cards, because Yummy summons so much on your own turn, there's a couple of cards that are actually really strong against the Yummy board. Another card that is more specific than Pankratops, but is very good against the deck is this thing. Ally of Justice Quarantine. If your deck does not really need the normal summon, this is a broken card against Yummy because they're all light monsters and you just summon this thing. It's 1700. It can attack over Herald of Arclight and they cannot tag out any of their synchros if you start playing after, right? So this is really strong. Another card that I think could see some play is Ally of Justice Cycle Reader. Cycle Reader lets you banish 2 light monsters from the opponent's graveyard, which could mess up the Yummy grind game completely if you can banish, like, if they don't go through all 3 link monsters on the first turn, maybe you can just banish the links and then they can't do any quick synchros on your turn, or you can just banish 2 like the most annoying ones. Like let's say they have 1 lollipop in the graveyard and 1 cookie in the graveyard. You can immediately banish those 2 and then they won't have the pop and they won't have the graveyard banished that turn. They are not gone forever. Even the link monsters, you cannot like get rid of them forever because the field spells have the ability to recycle the stuff from grave and banishment, but it could have like a good immediate impact when you're trying to play into the board and you are like, okay, I can play through this, but like the graveyard banish from lollipop really messes me up, so I'm just gonna banish the lollipop with the cycle reader or something. So it's worth mentioning. This is not as broken against it, but it's worth mentioning because it's also gonna have like overlap into some other, like into Fiendsmith decks, which there's still gonna be people that play Fiendsmith in some way, shape, or form, I'm sure. So that could still be like a benefit of playing Cycle Reader over Quarantine, because Quarantine is very much just good against Yummy. If you play this into anything that isn't Yummy, it's not going to do anything basically, right? Which that remains to be seen if you can do that, right? Like if you play next format, there's a realistic chance that people are still going to play Mitsu Ryzeal, people might still play Malice, people will still play Vanquish Soul. Maybe you can't afford to side deck a card just for Yummy. We'll see how impactful the deck is. Another thing that's good about Yummy, though, for sure, is the fact that this deck is definitely weak to Maxi in some shape. Like, yeah, in some ways, I think Maxi might even be better on your own turn. How about Koakime Rodrigo? I mean, I think you can figure out for yourself that if this card is good against the deck, that Koakime Rodrigo is also good against the deck if your deck functions under it. Like that goes without saying. But Yummy is looking cool, honestly, and I'm 50-50 on Yummy. On the one hand, I think the deck is it's a very classic 1-card combo deck, right? Like it's a very classic 1-card combo focused deck. That part about it, I'm not a huge fan of, but at the same time, I think the play style of this deck, I think, is cool. The whole like, I'm gonna set up this board and I'm gonna do a whole tag out on your opponent's turn. That play style is cool. I like that a lot. Of course, it does have the ability to set up Omni Negates in Herald of the Arclight, but at the very minimum, those Omni Negates, first of all, if you start with your best starter, Obedience School, you can't make Arclight, which is going to make the deck more consistent, but also more fair. But also, Arclight is like one of the weaker Omni Negates in the game because it tributes itself. Also, it's very small, so you can run over it, at least. If it's a small positive, but it is for deck building purposes, it's a very standard 1-card combo deck where you just play a bunch of 1-card starters and then non-engine. Whether it's hand traps or board breakers remains to be seen. So deck building wise, I think Yummy is not that interesting, but I think the playing for it is the fun part. How good is Nib into this deck? Nib is fine, but you can basically always nib this deck and it will take something away from their end board, but it is very unlikely to stop your opponent from playing completely. which is arguably how Nib should be. And the reason for that is that Link Spider basically makes it so you can summon more yummies from your hand, because it's a Link 1. So you can, like, let's say they will usually go Yummy Way, Cupsy Yummy Way, search 2 yummies, keep playing, then you eventually have to Nib before they can make Arclight, and then they can make Link Spider and special more yummies from the hand. But like, I think this is a healthy interaction, because in this instance, it's like the Nibiru will take something away from your opponent's end board. You know, it'll reduce the end board by like an Arclight or 2, but they still play. You know, and I think that's fine. I think that's cool. Also, I'm pretty sure if they go Obedience Schooled, Nibiru is probably gonna mess them up bad, right? If they go Obedience Schooled, you probably get wrecked by Nib. I'm not entirely sure. I guess you can search a Yummy Surprise, which can at least special a Yummy back from the grave. So you can still do something with that. Yeah, you can set up a surprise to play around Nib. That's fine. But still, Nib is solid against it. Nib is solid against it. The problem with Nib, I think, is more what the other decks... Like, I think Nib is not great into Vanquish Soul K9, even though it can work, but like they have Ripper, right? So I think Nib is not going to be great into the other decks. But Nib might be a very solid side deck option for next format, because you can side it against Yummy, and then there's always rogue decks, right? There's always rogue decks where you're happy to have Nib in your side deck. So Nib is fine. Nib is very fine.